I thought this was important to do because I had a lot of conversations where the RSMs and even the solution architects were not aware of the plug-in and the amount of work that Quantum's done with the joint effort with engineering to support our storage infrastructure from a tiering perspective, right? And I know you guys have done plug-ins with other companies in the past, but that's not the same plug-in. This was a special plug-in specifically for StoreNext, which is our product line, and the ability for us to tier data to cloud or to tape technology. And so I wanted to get all you guys together and go through a demo so you guys can understand where we fit in X-Protect and how it works. So when you guys are out there and you're selling and you're running into opportunities where there's, you know, longer retention times, large infrastructures where Quantum can provide some value around the storage costs and managing the data more efficiently, that you could say, hey, we got a good integration with Quantum. You guys, I'm going to bring them in. You guys should talk to them. So I'm going to hand this over to Bryce. He's done all the certification with Milestone. He's done a lot of testing with the plugin as well, and we'll have him walk you through what this looks like. Feel free within, hopefully, Bryce, I can just ask questions real time so you guys are comfortable and get everything answered. So I appreciate everybody's time on a Friday. I know everybody's busy. So go ahead, Bryce. I'll let you take over from there.
All right, guys, I'll walk through my demo here. Like Brian said, if you have any questions as we go along, just shout them out. We can stop and discuss. Not a problem at all. We've got just kind of a small environment set up here to run through this demo. Just a couple of cameras writing out to what we call our managed StoreNext file system. And what that means is that StoreNext is able to move the data that we write out, our BLK block files, to other tiers of storage and keep track of where they are. We kind of put a little shortcut in place of the file so that when a request comes in for that data to be accessed from the client or whatever it is, StoreNext is able to reach out to the tier of storage that we've written it to and pull it back, in this case from tape, back to disk, and then, you know, send that data to the client that's requesting it. So that's our architecture. I'll run through a few things real quick without diving too deep into the StoreNext architecture. StoreNext is accessed through a client that we install on each of the recording hosts that we set up in the Milestone environment. We've got the client mounting the file system to a Windows drive letter. So in this case, we've got our StoreNext file system called SNSM1. It's a managed file system mounting to the F drive. And within Milestone, on our recording server storage config, we've got that path set up as the live database location. So we're writing directly into the F drive under a subfolder called VMS Test Server 02. That directory path is being monitored by StoreNext, and when the data that we've written meets the policy that we've defined, it will take that data, the block files specifically, and copy them off to tape media. And then after a period of time, or in this case, immediately after the copy to tape, we truncate it from the disk file system, leaving behind that pointer to the data on tape. So that's how we're approaching this. That gives us a lot of flexibility in our storage. We're able to, in a very cost-effective way, write a large amount of data out to our StoreNext disk file system and then off to tape, and we're able to accommodate very large or long retentions. So this works out really well. Now, the challenge that we ran into was figuring out how to account for the delay in mounting a tape to a tape drive and then seeking up to the data that was being requested for playback and playing that back without timing out within the Milestone client application. You know, we do take a little bit of time to deal with that. If you guys have ever dealt with tape, you know that, you know, the robotics involved and the functionality of that setup does take some time. So working together, we came up with a pretty nice solution in the form of this Milestone Quantum Prefetch plugin. That's a plugin that gets installed and integrated with the XProtect Smart Client. So we'll get a little kind of tab on the side of the client screen that gives us that client prefetch functionality. Now, before I dive into that and show you guys how it works, just wanted to talk a little bit about the architecture of the plugin and generally what's involved when we deploy this, and maybe what we have to do to prep to get this installed correctly. So this folder contains some of the files that we deal with when we implement this plugin. There's a couple different components. Number one is the actual prefetch service that gets installed on every recording server that's working within this tiered StoreNext architecture. That's an important piece. It does need to be installed on each recording server, and we get a standard Windows service. So if we open up our Windows services and scroll down to the Milestone section, you can see that we have an entry for the Milestone Quantum Tape Prefetch service. As part of the setup, we do have to change the logon account. That has to be set to an account that has administrator level access to this server, and then the service needs to be restarted with those credentials in place.
Just to clarify, so you've got an F drive set up as an archive drive, and then so we're writing to that as part of the archiving process. So I guess there's a spinning drive out there that takes it as a buffer, and then from that point it's offloaded to tape in the background?
That's correct, yep. So our StoreNext managed file system is disk-based, and we have, in this case, SAN-attached ones that make up that file system that Milestone can write out directly to. Once we get the data out there on that disk file system, then everything else happens in the background. As far as the Milestone recorder is aware, it's just a standard SAN-attached file system.
So Milestone still sees a placeholder for that file living on the F drive, and then when it asks for it, that's when your stuff engages in the background, and somehow it just tells Milestone, hold on a minute, and then while it loads the video, and then pulls the data in. Is that?
Yeah, sort of. Close? So we very close. Yep. We'll get into the specifics there in a sec, but let me show you what it looks like from a Windows perspective. This is our F drive. This is our mounted StoreNext file system. We've got a subfolder out here called VMS Test Server 02, and this is where we're writing the live database files. So we can see all of our camera entries and archive folders and live database folders out here. And this looks exactly the same as what you would see with like an NTFS formatted direct attached one. It's exactly the same from the Milestone perspective. So we can drill down in, we can see our block files. On the back end, because this is our managed file system, StoreNext then takes this data and applies some policies that we create to this data and says, okay, once this data has been closed, the file is closed, and it exists on the file system for 5 minutes or whatever we configure in the policy, it qualifies for a copy or a move from this disk-based file system out to tape. So the first thing we do is we take the block file and we make a copy of it and store it to tape. And at that point in time, it exists as copies in both the disk-based file system and out on tape. So we kind of get a protection copy on the tape side. And we want to do that as quickly as possible. So it's usually, a pretty quick copy from disk to tape. We then apply truncation policies. And one of our goals is to leave this block data on disk for as long as we can. We don't want to store it to tape and then immediately cut it from the disk-based file system, because we want to be able to play back from disk as much as possible. So usually our truncation policy is going to be much longer. We'll say, after 2 weeks, or whatever works with the data storage capacity that we have on that disk-based file system, we'll say, okay, after 2 weeks, let's go ahead and truncate it from the disk-based file system. We'll leave that pointer behind pointing to tape. And then if that data is requested after that 2-week period, then we'll make the request to pull it back from tape to disk, and then we can play back from disk. Does that make sense, guys?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, guys, this is Brian. When we design these solutions, we understand from the customer, hey, how many days do you want on spinning disk? Hey, we usually recall stuff within 30 days. Okay, so we build the StoreNext file system to have enough space to handle 30 days. And then after 30 days, if it hasn't been accessed, then that's when we kind of move it off. So we have the flexibility to grow either tier as large as they want. So it could be a petabyte file system if that holds 30 days or 60 days, and then so much on the second tier. So,
that's right.
Hey, Ryan and Bryce, this is Rainier. I just want to, in the last couple of months, last 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 or 4 months, how many tape drive archiving systems have been sold by Quantum? You know?
Brian, do you know that one?
Yeah, so I've closed 2 deals that are each 2 petabytes in grow houses in Canada. One of them had, 2 of them have 2 different styles. One of them had ingesting cameras into Milestone servers with storage already, so no StoreNext there, but had our nearline Artico system to where Milestone said, okay, I ingested in, and then after so many days, I moved the data to the Artico, which was the gateway to tape. So I had a double step. The second one was Valens, and Valens is actually doing what we're doing here. They're ingesting the cameras directly into a StoreNext file system, so Milestone doesn't have to do the movement. StoreNext takes that on itself, and we can move the data seamlessly between the tier. But both of them use the plugin. Both of them are up and working and operational today. So we're going to look at doing some internal win reports, case studies, that just kind of indicate what the solution looks like, so you guys are aware of what it is.
And the key factor, the reason I asked that is we have seen an increased request from Quantum for Quantum's prefetch for this tape archive. And the big reason for this tape archive, the interest in it, is a lot of storage, and the tape archive is not like an old tape archive, and it is 10 cents on the dollar compared to spinning disks. So it's very cost effective for some of these large storage areas. And the performance difference of the access, I mean, the customer doesn't see whether it's coming from tape or disk. It's just a little bit of a delay on the order of a second or so, delay difference between pulling it from disk and pulling it for tape. But the 10 cents on the dollar cost to the customer is one of the driving factors. So I just wanted to point that out, and that the increase, I'm surprised at the amount of requests we've received in the last several months for this solution.
Yeah. What you guys are going to see is there is a bit of delay as we pull the data back from tape to disk, but that's where the plugin comes in. We don't want to make a request and sit there and wait and potentially time out from the client while the data comes from tape to disk and then to the client. So the plugin's purpose is to issue a prefetch. We say, okay, for this time range and these cameras, figure out which files we need to pull back from tape to disk. Go ahead and do that work in the background while we wait, or do other things. And then once that data is back on disk, then we'll do a playback just like we normally would, and it's coming from disk, not directly from tape. So, we don't have issues with the client timeouts. So we do playback.
Does this mean a user has to know what they're going to request and then ask for that in advance, so it's queued up, and then when they go to play it back, then it's ready?
Yeah. So, if they have an investigation and they know, we need to be looking at playback data from 7 in the morning until 9 in the morning, and we know that these are the cameras of interest. That's the data that they plug into the plugin and kick off the job to retrieve and prefetch those files from tape to disk. It is very quick. I mean, it doesn't take long. Usually, within 5 to 10 minutes, we've got the data back from tape to disk, and then they can go in through the client and play back for that time range, and everything is on disk, so it plays back as normal.
Hypothetically, if they don't do the prefetch thing, they just go back, just pick a time, a year and a half, and some random time and try to play it. How does the system react then? The
request will usually time out, and they just won't get anything back. But after it does actually retrieve the data from tape to disk, if they try it again, then it works. As long as there's not that delay to retrieve from tape to disk, it works fine. And, if the tape that the data lives on is actually in the tape drive and we don't have to use the robotics to, grab the tape from the slot and move it into the tape and queue it up, if it's already there, they might get lucky and it could, pull it back within the amount of time that we have before a timeout occurs.
Does the act of making that request and having it time out initiate the system to load that data, or do you still have to request it through the prefetch?
It does. So the way it works is as soon as a request comes from the host or the client to read that block data back from our storage location, StoreNext picks up on that and immediately starts to do the job in the background to move it from tape to disk. So that's all seamless. It just requires one read request, and StoreNext is on it and handling the movement. But because it does take time and we don't give the response back that, yep, this data is available before Milestone says, okay, it's been too long, then, we get those timeouts.
Hey, typically, guys, when we design this solution and we're working with the end user or the admin that's going to be managing the system, they understand that they have a plug-in. They know there's 30 days worth of disk space before they have to pull back from archive. And so it's an education, right? They know their system. Hey, I need something from a year ago. They're going to go right there to the plug-in, and you'll see Bryce. He's going to show it here pretty soon, and it should answer all your questions. But it should be very intuitive, and they know how to work their system. We shouldn't see any, oh, man, I totally forgot, and I went into here, and I just tried to retrieve it. That's a year old. And if they do get that timeout, they're going to know, oh, dude, totally spaced it. Should have went to the plug-in and pulled it back. So.
Yep. And to Brian's point, because we leave, we try and leave as much data on disk as possible, 30 days or whatever it ends up being before we truncate, how many requests, how many playback requests actually come in for data older than 30 days? It's pretty small, very small percentage. So they won't be dealing with this all that often. Usually their requests are going to be for data within that first 30 days, and that will be on disk. So let's go ahead and move on. Hopefully showing how this works will answer some of your other questions that you have. So anyway, that's our service that gets installed that I just showed you. On the recorder side, that's the piece that kind of interfaces with our StoreNext web API and is able to issue the request to retrieve the data that we're asking for from tape to disk. So very important piece. There's a configuration file that comes along with that we just kind of have to configure to point to the StoreNext environment and map the path from the recording server perspective to the internal path on StoreNext. So that's all done during install time and makes everything work.
Hey, Bryce, can you talk about who's responsible? So say we have an opportunity with Milestone and Quantum. Who's responsible for installing the plugin on the Milestone server?
As I understand it, it is Milestone's responsibility. It's really not our plugin. Milestone owns the plugin, and from what I understand, Milestone should be involved with the installation of that plugin.
Okay. And Rainier, is there identified engineers on the Milestone side that the team should reach out to, or? for doing that installation?
Well, it's like any of the plugins that we have various people that are versed with the particular plugins. But really, we look to the integrators to to get familiar and understand how to install the plugin. So,
okay.
Is there a good manual in this? Because I mean, it doesn't seem like it's too hard if it's documented well.
There is. The manual is pretty good. It describes, what needs to get installed where. The naming is a little bit similar, and I think that's caused the most confusion that I've seen. This is our service installer that gets installed on the recording server. This is the actual plugin installer that gets installed on the client side. And that seems to get mixed up quite a bit. So we may want to, maybe refine the document a little bit more to differentiate those things. I can give some feedback to Mike Terrace, who I've worked with the most on this, and hopefully he can get it to the right people. So.
Yeah, I think ultimately on that, when it comes to it, I mean, Rainier is spot on. I mean, we'd really expect our integrators to do this. And so I think really what would happen is, a system gets sold. If it's the first time that a specific integrator has worked with Quantum on this kind of deal, we'd make sure that they understand how to do it. We'd kind of, help coach from the sidelines a little bit, and then, and really kind of teach them to fish, right? So they would understand how to deploy it. So then any deployments that they have afterwards, then they're really the ones in charge of it.
Cool.
All right. So in addition to the service installer, the plugin installer actually installs the plugin on the client. So any client systems that would need this functionality, the plugin needs to get installed as well. And there should be an associated license file that gets dropped into the plugin installation directories. This license file is generated and supplied by Milestone Custom Development. So we send out an email with the license code from the Milestone installation to Custom Development. They reply back with the license file, and that gets installed on the client side. So that's our architecture, guys. Pretty simple. Really, it's not a complicated install. Just, requires a little bit of specific knowledge, but not too bad to implement. So let's go ahead and move on to our XProtect Smart Client. With everything in place, when we launch the client, if the license isn't valid or it isn't installed, we'll get a pop-up message that says invalid license. But if everything is installed correctly, when we go to the Playback tab, under our MIP plugins section, we'll see the Quantum Prefetch plugin. And that's what it looks like. So very simple. There's not a lot of data to populate here. We give it our time interval for the time selection we want to pull back for. And we either use the current camera view that we've set up, or we do a custom and select the cameras that we're interested in pulling back data for. Now again, guys, this is just for data that's kind of met our policy truncation parameters and been copied off to tape and then truncated from the primary disk-based file system. Now you can set a range within the first 30 days or whatever our on-disk policy is, and that's fine. It won't cause a problem. It'll just skip over those files if they're already on disk. So I'm going to select a time range from yesterday. We'll go to about 5 p.m. to, let's just go 5:10.
Hey, Bryce, while you're doing that, hey, guys, everything's done off of access patterns. So say you're searching for stuff that's 6 months old, but a handful of those you brought back the day before, and they're still sitting on disk. Like Bryce said, if it's already on disk, it just skips over them. So as long as data is being accessed, it stays on disk all the time. As soon as it's not accessed, that's when it follows the policy of, hey, hasn't been accessed in 30 days, make it a candidate to move off, okay?
Yep. All right, so we've got everything in place for the prefetch job that we're going to kick off. We've got our interval, we've got our cameras. then we just click Start. It's going to connect to the prefetch service and then starts issuing those requests to StoreNext, and will give us kind of a progress bar as it works on the request and pulls things back from tape.
Hey Bryce.
Yep.
What happens if someone, like a user, goes and tries to view video just on our normal timeline that's been moved to tape? Does it just basically time out and they get some error that our software is generating, basically?
That's where we're going to get the timeout issues, and yeah, it'll basically just not display anything. Okay. And in my experience, sometimes to get it to actually kind of refresh once the data is back, you may have to close the client and open it back up. So it does get a little bit ugly there, but it doesn't like crash the application or anything like that from what I've seen.
Let me ask you something. Also, if somebody pulls the tape out of the actual device because you already have a lot, how would that, I mean, do you have a way of messaging an operator to install the tape back into the unit so it could be read?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So if we vaulted the media out of the library, there's going to be a message that'll pop up within the StoreNext GUI interface, letting the operator know that an action needs to be performed. Oh, by the way, you can see the progress down here. And that took, what, 2 minutes? We retrieved 16 block files for the 10-minute time range that we specified for 2 cameras. So anyway, yes, the operator will have to load the media into the library, get it back accessible again, and then the job should complete. Now,
here, let me talk a little bit about that. Guys, we support a feature called vaulting. So if people want to hold 30 days on disk and then a year in the tape library where it's active, just like this, where you can bring it back, but then they want to actually vault the tapes, so take them out of the library and put them on a shelf. We have complete email notifications within our system that identifies or lets admin know if data needs to be retrieved from a vaulted tape. So say they go to pull back data from 2 years and that tape 1, 2, 3, 4 is on a shelf, they'll get an email notification saying, hey, you need to load tape 1, 2, 3, 4 back in the library because we're trying to access data. Then they can go pull it back, put it back in the library, and then we'll pull the data back to disk. Okay?
Very good.
All right, so guys, the job completed successfully. We connected to the Milestone service on the recording server, which then communicated through our web API to the StoreNext environment. We knew exactly by interfacing with Milestone which files needed to be pulled back. There were 16 of them, and that's what the job did. It issued the request to retrieve from tape to disk. Now all of that data for that 10-minute time range that we specified is on disk, and we can play back as normal. Now, the safest way to do that, rather than scrolling the timeline, is to use our start and end date and time range selector. So we can do the same thing that we did with the plugin, select our start and end day, and then specify the time that we want to play back for. Hit OK. That zooms us right into that time range, and then we can hit play, and it'll play as normal. Not sure if I have anything going on here during this time range. Get a beautiful view of our lab.
So you guys mentioned that obviously there's a schedule. So after 30 days or whatever is defined, then it goes to tape. But you also mentioned that if people are continuing to access the video, then that renews the timer, so to speak. So it's 30 days after the last access. Is there an easy way for someone to know just by looking at it if it's on tape or not? Because by date, that's easy enough. You can say, hey, this is over 30 days old. But what you don't know is if somebody's accessed it prior to that and renewed the 30-day timer, so to speak. Is there a means of knowing whether it's quickly available or if it's off on tape somewhere?
There is through StoreNext.
Do you keep a log of how many times a particular section have been accessed?
There are ways to get that information from StoreNext, but for the general operator that's going to be working with the client and the plugin, If they're not sure, they can always just put in that start and interval, hit start, and it'll retrieve anything that isn't on disk. But if it is on disk, it just skips it, and it's really quick. So it's just kind of a good check to do if you're not sure. But we can always train the operator as well on how to access that information from StoreNext.
One question in regards to, you mentioned before that if somebody's trying to use the regular search out of a smart client and it times out because actually it's in tape and needs to be used, the plugin, but then you indicated that you may need to close a smart client, reopen it in order to reaccess it. Do you know if there is any work being done in order to maybe improve on that, maybe something along the lines of the operator getting a message, information not available, please check plugin or whatever, and you don't have to shut down the application and bring it back online?
Not that I'm aware of, but to Brian's point earlier, it's really a training issue. And the people that buy into the solution, they'll know that, anything past this date and time, they really should be using the Quantum Prefetch plugin every time they make a request.
Okay. I mean, I find the application very good, very practical, but that particular point, the fact that you had to close a client and reopen it, that's the only thing that I see a little bit like it wasn't, I don't know, that one was missed or something.
That was only if you made a request and it timed out and you didn't do the prefetch. If you do the prefetch, that's not a factor.
Oh, no, I know, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
And in a perfect world, we'd love that. We'd love to be able to go straight from there and, right before you time out, just pop up and say, hey, check your archive plugin, can't access file, or...
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Something. But that'd go back to Milestone engineering to say, hey, do we want to put this notification in? Or,
that timeout issue is going to be on our
we
end.
always think the same thing. Yeah. I mean, it could be really easy. It could say, hey, do we have a plugin already installed for archive, and is this taking more than 15 seconds to bring back? If so, hey guys, please search the plugin to bring back archive data. Okay, cool, thanks. Close it out.
Yep.
Rainier, why don't you push that? Push that down to engineering, see if they can pull that off.
Yeah, I think there will be. I mean, I know going through engineering is something else sometimes, but I think it will be something that would actually enhance it.
Yeah,
I like it
for sure. All right, guys. Well, that's the plugin. Hopefully, that gives you a pretty good idea of what the plugin architecture is, how it works. Any additional questions that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Mike. When we're sizing servers, typically, we have, of course, our own internal archiving processes. And as we're sizing the storage, what we know is that our internal archives cause some strain on the disk from a throughput perspective, typically making the bottleneck much tighter than what it would have been had we just been writing to that disk without an archive. How do we account for that in your system? Obviously, it's doing some of that reading on its own to move data off to tape, and the reads typically tend to provide a little or cause a little more disk contention. Is there a good sizing mechanism that we should be using? Do you guys have a calculator that we can tap into, or some additional guidance for that?
Yeah, we're working on that right now, and you're exactly correct. We do have to read the data off of disk when we copy the tape, so we do need to account for that additional overhead. Brian, do you know if that's been incorporated into the sizing tool that Steve's worked on?
Yeah, I don't know either. How we get around it, guys, we have our own server and storage, right? So we can cover the whole spectrum. And typically in these environments, we have our active RAID systems on the back end. So the throughput to those is great enough to handle ingest into the camera, and at the same time be able to handle outbound traffic to our tape library. And we can expand that with the amount of spindles necessary to support that. What I don't believe we have right now is what you're asking for is, hey, let me put in this criteria and spit out, this is what the system looks like. one base controller and one expansion with 24 spindles. In order
yeah, I
to
mean, really,
it's an outbound.
Yeah, it's the spindle count that we're most interested in. And if we just had something that we could say, this is the throughput expectation that we have from a megabyte per second perspective, and what does that mean on your side that we need from a number of spindles and so forth. So I don't think it's that difficult. It's just a matter of having some good way to obtain the data.
Yeah, I can give you an idea. At the Valens one, we had one base and one expansion, so 24 spindles of 8 terabyte. Was it 8 terabyte or 6 terabyte drive? I think 6 terabyte drive.
6 terabyte drive.
Yeah. So, and that handled 100 cameras ingesting directly in our file system while also moving data to tape.
Okay.
Just to give you kind of a ballpark. And we can pull, when we build out our solution, we pull specs, right? Sequential reads, writes, random, like what's the performance of our actual storage array as it ingests.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So I have a whole sales team as well. So I have a guy on the West Coast, a guy in Dallas, and a guy on the East Coast. We expand all the way up into Canada, and we actually expand down into Latin America. So we like to work with you guys in the field. So if there's opportunities, you reach out to the team. We have solution architects as well, so we can help you kind of build out solutions that make sense, especially for these environments, because we have different tape technology, libraries, we have different storage solutions, and so building the right one out for the customer is important.
Right,
great.
guys.
And then, Mike, again, just one last thing from my perspective. Some of the other guys might have questions, but I just wanted to thank you guys for the overview here. You've done exactly what we asked, which was to give us a nice technical kind of deep dive of what you're doing and the opportunity to ask questions so that we had a really good understanding of what it is that that you're delivering, as opposed to just the sales presentation, which is fine from a value proposition perspective, but I think that's pretty obvious from this. We really want to know technically how it works and how it functions so that we can understand what the potential pitfalls may be and where we may need to be aware that it could cause some problems and so forth. So I think it's a really good presentation. We appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And thanks for all the great questions, guys.